Hey, welcome back. We're talking about dual and credit, Ashland known as dual enrollment. I was trying to say that at the same time, but dual credit and dual enrollment, where you get college credit while you're in high school. And so we have both Summer and Thomas Vertrees. And Thomas, we wanted to pick your brain a little bit because, you know, we know you're a board certified psychiatric nurse practitioner. You've been in mental health for 15 years, like we talked about earlier, and you've been in private practice for 3.5 years. So we wanted to know, what are some emotional issues that students can have when they have such major responsibilities of taking a college class?
Well, one of the things that's really unique about this process is that you're dealing with students that are beginning that developmental transition into adulthood. Okay? And you gain the benefit. You know, sometimes parents struggle with that, kind of sending their children out of the nest, so to speak. But the benefit, one of the benefits of dual enrollment, is that you get to experience a very adult type activity while you're still actually in the home with your parents or with your caregivers. So so you can really take advantage of that in the sense of you can watch your child or watch your young person begin that transition from being a child to an adult and start to work with them and mentor them in that capacity. And so in regards to specifically emotional support, one of the things that was really unique for me, I think, is that when I graduated from high school, I was ranked pretty high in school. And so college was an experience that when I went into it, now both of my parents had college degrees, and so I was kind of familiar with the process, but specifically speaking, I had a different perspective on college. And in fact, my expectations were probably a little skewed. And so one of my very early experiences in college, I actually almost failed one of my very first courses in college. And that experience of failure, that experience of approaching failure, was very, very significant in my development because, to be perfectly honest, I hadn't had a whole lot of experience with that. And I think that's something that sometimes is unique for the type of students that might be considering dual enrollment or dual credit courses, is that they're, in many cases, kind of at the top of their game. And in some ways, it's an opportunity to have very adult type conversations about setting proper expectations, dealing with difficult situations, and what does it mean for you as an individual if maybe sometimes the bar is a little bit higher than you really anticipated.
Because you're experiencing that with your parents' guidance instead of being away from home. And I think that really it resonates for us in the Latino community because we do have such strong families. And so it's really helpful for parents to know that they can have this type of college experience in the home to prepare them for college in a completely different way than it would be if you were sending your child out when they're 18, 10, but you're actually having this experience at 16 or 17.
You can journey it together.
In the same house, some of those
together.
questions. And so this always is something that's close to my heart. When you have parents who are a little bit nervous about having conversations with their student, how do they open up that conversation at 16, at 17, when their student may not want to talk about feeling overwhelmed, or they want to have that persona of, I've got this all covered, you know, I'm good. I don't need mom and dad right now. So what do you do?
Again, I think it's really interesting because it has to do with the developmental level that individual is at, in the sense that a 16, 17, 18-year-old is a lot different than a younger child because they might actually have some pretty decent ideas about how things are working or how things are going. And I think one of the most important things is, as a parent, to go into the situation with an open mind that this is almost a fully grown adult in that sense, and that they have a perspective on things. They might already have ideas about what might work or not work. So as a parent, you don't necessarily go into the situation with all the answers ready to go.
You can leverage their ideas and maybe ask, like, well, what do you think? But what if you see your student, your child struggling? Like, they're in Miss Vertrees' class, and you can tell, like, it's not looking good.
She's not going easy on it.
She's not going easy.
A lot of easy.
And
pick up a
so
high standard.
how do you gently tell your child, like, you need to pick it up a little bit more to help them, or even when it taps into motivation? Like, what if you have an unmotivated, really smart child?
Well, I think one part of that that I think is really important is, again, going back to that conversation that this is almost not a child anymore. This is an adult. adult, that it gives you an opportunity as a parent to talk about maybe even work situations that you've been in where you had to deal with an expectation that was difficult to meet or difficult to overcome. And to be perfectly honest, there are situations where sometimes the best lesson that kids can learn is what happens when you don't meet that expectation.
Right. It really changes the conversation, is what you're saying. Because one conversation is my daughter's a junior and a senior in high school. That's a conversation, but now they're in college.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're still a junior, senior in high school.
Right.
Yeah.
So Ms. Vertrees is treating them like an adult.
Yeah.
And maybe the high school isn't treating them that way, but in her class, they're an adult. So it's a great testing ground.
Well, and another way of also looking at that is it gives your opportunity as a parent with your child to set them up to interact with that instructor on their own. I mean, we have as a parent myself, I've had sit downs with teachers and had discussions and conversations, and being in a dual enrollment course or dual credit course is another opportunity to help coach your student on how to deal with a problem as an adult and approach it from that angle instead of always sometimes kind of coming in and trying to rescue the situation.
So maybe in this situation or these kinds of courses, coaching them how to have that conversation, almost instead of a parent-child or parent-teacher conversation, that it would be more a teacher-student conversation, but you're preparing them for
absolutely, a critical skill that any transitioning adolescent to adulthood would value.
Yeah, certainly.
Requires a lot of faith.
Absolutely.
In education.
Well, we're so thankful that you let us pick your brain. I know that what you do is so important, and we want you to know at home, if you're interested in saving money, if you want to get college credit in high school, you should look into dual credit, dual enrollment. Maybe the Lord is giving you information on this show to help you to know how to save some dollars and maybe expedite your whole educational process. So we want you to know a little bit about what's happening all across our country. Watch this and find out more.
I think that our biggest problem with our education system is that in different school districts, different states, the goalposts are in different locations. The kids are just not receiving the same quality of education that they do in certain districts.
Hey, welcome back. You know, we've been talking about dual credit, dual enrollment, and it looks differently across the United States. And so we just want to encourage you at home, if you want to save money, if you want your child to get some college experience but under your own roof, this is a great opportunity. So you should check it out.
If you want to cut your college expense in half.
Yes, literally in half.
I would, as a parent, I'm calling the school and saying, tell me about this dual thing.
Yes,
I want to know more about this.
You know, we were talking a little bit earlier during the break. Summer, you mentioned that you may not always be able to have conferences with parents. Is that right?
Correct. Because the student, technically, when they enroll in college, they're usually of age. They're the ones making their own decisions.
Yeah.
And if you're dually enrolled, you're not quite 18 yet, although some are. Some are 18 when they are, already seniors in high school. But just depending on the age and where they enroll, the parent may not be able to directly communicate with the professor. That professor does not have to respond to a parent in the same way that a high school teacher would. And so that would be where, as Thomas was saying earlier, you want to put that onus, that responsibility on your student to communicate and teach them those adult skills early. And of course, you can always go with your student to that professor, or you can always, send an email yourself and see if they respond. But, the liability there is really with the student, not with the parent in that particular
I like what the counselor said, and that is, this gives you an opportunity to help role play, prepare your student on what they might say to the teacher, how to do that. I mean, that's real world stuff.
Well, and
so
I think it's so beautiful that the Lord provides us those kinds of opportunities where He allows us to have a mentor in our life, or whether it's a parent or someone who cares about our long-term plan, what the Lord is calling us to do to help journey with us.
Correct.
What else stood out to you?
Well, I think the fact that students get to practice what college is like during junior year and senior year.
Yeah.
But I heard Summer also talk about their sacrifice. It requires focus and maturity. So it may not be for everyone, but I think everyone ought to take a look at it and see if it can be beneficial to them.
Absolutely. I just think it's important for you at home to know if the Lord's calling you to this, He will provide a path for you. But definitely Google it. Find out more about dual credit or dual enrollment. And we want to encourage you to continue raising the standards as you encourage your child to love the Lord with all of their minds.
Amen.
We'll see you next time.